associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces, and give ear, all ye far countries. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing the Gospel of Luke. We are in chapter 23. Now, we left off where they had him at the house of the high priest, and they were giving him, they were questioning, they were hitting him and stuff, and then they asked him, "Art thou the Christ?" And he answered with things that can be nothing but affirmative, as far as I'm concerned. And that makes sense, because one of the things that I always struggle with, just to understand, was in Isaiah chapter 53, in the suffering servant passage. One of the things it says, "As a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth." And he talks to them, but once again, there's a case of taking things too literally. Because the idea is, in what sense does he open his mouth, or not? And what it is by way of protest, or saying, hey, defending himself, attempting to make a defense to get himself out of the situation. Because there were ways, I suppose, he could have gotten out of it. This is all a big mistake. I didn't mean it. There's all kinds of lies he could tell. Obviously the Lord isn't going to lie, and he can't. He's going to do what God has willed. But I'm just saying, theoretically, there could be protestations made, defenses mounted. He can make accusations to them. The only reason this is happening is because of their jealousy, and he could do a miracle. So all the sense in which of him opening his mouth, it indicates by way of making a defense, protestation, or otherwise extracting himself from the situation. And it usually involves crafting some sort of argument. Because essentially, well, let's read a bit here, and then we'll talk about more. "And the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate." That's the multitude that is present at the house of the high priest, which is probably a very large house, because he'd be a well-to-do fellow to ascend to that heights. Even though it's not manifest that should be so, it is so. It's not manifestly so that a pastor ought to be a wealthy man, but so very often they are. At least by comparison, many of them are well paid. And a number of them actually earn that by going out and doing their pastoring with a lot of energy and conscientious effort. I'm not going to paint everyone with the same brush, and often those guys are not the ones who are raking in the cash, quite frankly. Excuse me. They began to accuse him, saying, We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. All lies. Because, they know he's on some level, we talked about this, that they kind of know he's the Christ, or he's supposed to be the Christ. Oh, this is supposed to be the Christ now, this guy. We don't like him. He can't be the Christ. Even though he's doing things and, that on one level are very Christ-like. But, there's enough ambiguity, certainly with his own pronouncements. He doesn't go around saying, I am the Christ, bow before me, calling down fireballs and lightning. Putting down the heathen and extending his dominion from sea to sea. Now, the thing is, they would have had a mixed understanding of the Christ, of the nature of Christ. We've talked about this throughout Luke. That you have Old Testament passages which talk about him as a suffering servant and meek and lowly, having salvation, and riding upon an ass, the colt full of an ass, and stuff like that. And then you have other passages talking about him, turning the winepress of God's wrath, and even the Old Testament, Isaiah 63 and stuff like that. Where you have some or establishing a earthly dominion from sea to sea. And you also have this idea that the Christ is going to be born a human on some level, but then also things that sort of indicate Christ as a divine figure, right? And how that all washes out to us might be obvious as Christians, but to them at the time, there was a lot of confusion, and the ambiguity between the Christ of establishing dominion and executing God's wrath on the heathen and restoring the kingdom to Israel versus the one who suffers, the one who serves, the one who comes meek and lowly and having salvation. There's an ambiguity. It's almost like, how do these two visions of Christ reconcile with each other? Like I said, we have an understanding, but it also provides people, at their time, it would provide them with grounds on which to question him in their own mind to make it easier. He's doing miracles and all this, partly fulfilling all these prophecies. Wholly fulfilling some, but others not. And like I said, the things written concerning me have an end, he says. There's a certain part of his ministry, or let's say his earthly life, all the prophecies concerning that were fulfilled, leaving nothing behind. And that's what he's concerned with. But for people not understanding the delineation between that, there is the potential for misunderstanding, and also for willful what do I call it? Self-delusion. Seeing these miracles and saying, this is, there's nothing to this. This is the work of the devil, obviously, as he heals someone. The work of the devil. And people easily find that when they, when righteousness comes, and a righteous prophet or a righteous, the righteous God, he starts prophesying to them, speaking God's words to them. And I mean it in that sense. Just as the Old Testament prophets, thus saith the Lord, all is not right with you people, essentially. Thus saith the Lord, all woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Jesus doesn't do a lot of thus saith the Lord like the prophets did, but he would just say it to them, because he, the Lord, thus says. And they were offended at these pronouncements against him. They couldn't receive it, and therefore it became grounds on which the miracles became less important. And, by the way, where is all this stuff? So the idea of him being a king Christ a king. Instead of it being something that should inspire fear in them, they're using it to inspire rage in the governor, Pilate. They haven't really identified Pilate as the governor here, unless they have in an earlier chapter that they might deliver him unto the governor Pilate. I forget if it even tells us who Pilate is in Luke up to this point, which is interesting. It's just interesting because sometimes, because you read all the Gospels over time, you have, like I said, I have certain verses that I remember more clearly from Matthew, and their parallel in Luke being slightly different is often, it gives you the sense of like, not the sense, but like it makes me want to quote the other one because that's the one I often in my mind think of. So anyways, I think of the other things Pilate says in these situations, like other things that are recorded. It's like, obviously, when you record an event, a lot of times, it's not a stenographer sitting there taking the dictation. It's like, well, what happened? Well, they accused him. They said this. They said he forbid to give taxes to Caesar, and Christ was the king. He was perverting the nation. That's a general synopsis. There may have been other things they accused him of. I don't know. There may have been more. There's always like the potential for there to be more. And there's always a potential for one gospel to leave out some detail and another one to contain it. Because the purpose in recording the Gospels was not necessarily to give you a blow-by-blow newspaper-like account, a journalistic or even scientific, like a historian's perspective. Like the writer would not have had that mentality. The point is to, in a narrative form, communicate the most pertinent information. So their accusations towards him are, as you can see, entirely false. As far as he did not claim to be Christ. He said, certainly the closest he ever came for them was when they were accusing him, and he says, you said it, essentially. He's going to say the same thing. They said, are you Christ? He says, if I tell you, you won't believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer me or let me go. Am I the Christ? Am I? Who do you say that I am? You're not even going to tell me who I am. Well, he might say sinner or something like that. Hereafter he will sit on the right hand of the power of God, he had said. And that's close. But like prior in public, he was never saying any such things. He asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? And they said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's what Peter said. He said, see thou tell no man. Blessed are your eyes, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, Simon Peter. And the forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, they tried that. They tried to get him to do that, to say something like that so they could accuse him. But he didn't play along. If anything, he pretty much said, pay your taxes. I mean, pretty much, because he said, the money belongs to the government, makes the money, so give the money to the government. It's their money, send it back. There you go. Whose picture is on this coin? Caesar's? Well, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. And render to God what is God's. Some people use their religion as a cloak for having to, we want to avoid things. Like, my religion doesn't allow me to pay taxes, I mean, there was a case where an Amish guy tried that, back a while ago. I mean, like literally a century ago. I forgot the name of the case. I believe he was Amish or a Mennonite or something similar. But he did not want to pay income taxes, and he lost that case. And, he wanted to use his religion to shelter himself. I don't even know if he actually brought it up as a religious question, by the way, because the Amish thing is not obviously purely a religious thing. It's a cultural thing. I mean, they cloak it in a religious thing, like, it's somehow bound up in the religion, but they've got the religion bound up with their culture very tightly. I mean, so anyways, so they accused him of forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, but it's nonsense. Saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Oh, he claims to be some sort of king, Pilate. They're trying to dangle it in front of him. Look at, here we go. Now, Pilate's a very crafty and worldly wise man in his way. And from the way I read him, it seems like he sees this. I mean, he sees this. Here come all the leaders of the Jews. All the leaders, they've got this guy, and he's beat up. The guy doesn't look particularly threatening. He doesn't look like the kind of guy necessarily who, causing trouble. Plus, he's an adult in his 30s. So, in the time Pilate's been there, he's never come up before. Not that he necessarily would. I don't know how the justice system worked, but, sure, the governor had the power to put people to death. The Pharisees weren't supposed to. I mean, people. It's an interesting thing because they were trying to stone women, and maybe that was just okay. They're not people as far as that's sometimes how things worked back then. And it's like you can't just put some man to death. I mean, but you can put her to death. Go ahead. I don't know if that's the case, or if some of those killings were extrajudicial, as they say, outside the justice system. I don't know to what degree they allowed them to carry out their own justice. Obviously, they were allowed to do some sort of general policing of their own people. In fact, that would be desirable for the Romans to have and that's why a lot of times they maintained this sort of structure of societies that they conquered. Like, in a town, you don't necessarily depose the mayor. What you do is you put a Roman overseeing all the government, and then the smaller governors and the town leaders are answerable to the Roman authorities. But it's easier if you're ruling a vast empire than bringing all your own people in. It's not like when William of Normandy conquered England. Wasn't that 1066? But anyways, when he conquered England, he brought all his noblemen with him to take over and to become they left lands in France to actually become the lords in Britain. To become actual lords there, they left behind other holdings, many of them. They actually became, not just as a ruler. We still have Herod the king. And though he is not the king the Jews would have had, and he is not even, I believe, a Jew, even though he was king over Judea, still, he represents a sort of local authority. So Pilate asks him, "Art thou king of the Jews?" And he answered and said, "Thou sayest it." Then said Pilate to the chief priests and the people, and to the people, "I find no fault in this man." So, here's the thing. It's like I said, it's like, what does this mean? You say it. Thou sayest it. You said it. The only idiom I know that works that way is an affirmation. It's an affirmation. It's not a denial. He certainly denies it not. So, in a sense, I wonder if there isn't a bit of comedy here between Pilate and the Lord to some degree. At least at the initial thing here, because they bring him in and they make these wild accusations. And he's beat up. He's a road, he's someone who lives his life on the road. You know what I mean? He's not He's not going to be all posh and, they always show Jesus dressed in a white garment with a blue sash on it for some reason, freshly laundered, But much more likely, his garments were a road-worn yellow. They were probably good quality because we know that from the way the soldiers cast the dice. They were quality, well made, but they're not going to be fancy, and they're going to be, have a little of the dust of the road in them, perhaps. I mean, unless he was in the habit of keeping several changes of clothes with him at all time and changing them and washing them on a daily basis. But I'm saying is like, I wouldn't expect, some people say Jesus was essentially homeless. I don't like that. That's ridiculous. It's not the right perspective. Any more than you don't classify someone who is like a traveling something or other as a homeless person. They're just someone who's living on the road. But it's not the same. A homeless person is someone who's destitute and couldn't have a home. Like if Jesus had wanted to, he could have had a home. In fact, he had a home, but he left his home. It wasn't a question of like losing or being homeless or silly things like the way we think of homeless is not at all what this is talking about. I mean, college students could be considered homeless, whatever, in certain in certain contexts. So it's just not the right mentality. So he's standing there, but he's going to be a little rough around the edges, I would assume. He's been traveling nonstop for some time, and with only breaking here and breaking there. So I mean, he's going to have a bit of a rugged, dusty. I'm not saying he's dusty, but like those are the kind of things you would expect. He's not presenting what I'm saying is he's not going to present this sort of well-bathed, perfumed, coiffed hair kind of regal appearance that Pilate would associate with a king. He just looks like a normal person who spent a good deal of time outside. And that's for sure. He's going to have being outside has its effects on you. You work outside a lot, you're going to look like you work outside a lot. And Jesus was outside a lot. So he says, thou sayest it. I interpret that as an affirmation. And I don't know if the idiom is the same as, he's not accusing Pilate. Well, you said that. I didn't say that. You said that. I don't think that's the power of that. Because here's the thing. Ready? Whoa, that's off badly. That is off badly. Here's the thing. I'm going to talk about this while I refix my camera here. The thing is, there's only two possible ways of looking at that. I should be here like it matters. All right, so there's only two ways to really look at that. Let me see if all right, that's much better. And we'll bring it back. Yeah, sorry about the interruption, but see, watch, ready. The sound and the visual are pretty close. I just can't have them majorly delayed where I'm talking and it's da 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 da. That's not too bad. A little delay's all right. Because as far as I know, it does come out in the final video. I thought maybe it was an artifact on my computer at one point, but it's a full thing. Anyways, so you can interpret this basically two ways that I can see. I mean, maybe someone could tell me if you see more. But you say it is either him putting up some sort of defense saying, you say that. You just said that. I didn't say it. And therefore, I've never said that. It's like a sort of a form of weak denial. You know what I mean? Or it's going to have the force of saying, what you said is the truth. Or you have said so. In some, maybe the third way would be a sort of an uncommitted. You know what I mean? I guess it could have sort of the force of uncommitted. I'm not sure what the idiom, it's some sort of idiom for something, because as just a answer, it doesn't communicate a lot. It doesn't say much. It's hard to say because I've always read this and wondered what is he saying with this. It's somewhat mysterious. Maybe some people think, no, Paul, it's not mysterious. You're just stupid. I've had that thrown at me many times. Okay, sure. I'm just stupid. Well, here we go. So I think of that as an affirmation. You said it. And so it's like, are you the Christ? You said it. And he's not making a very kingly appearance. Because Pilate immediately is like, I find no fault with this man. He's just looking at it he's like, come on. You're saying he's all this grandiose claims. He doesn't look like he's trying to convince anybody that he's a king. You know what I mean? He's not, he's like, I know, he's sort of saying yes, but Pilate takes it as no. You know what I mean? Like, no. Like, he doesn't believe he's the Christ. And I think what Jesus is saying is, you said this, but you don't believe it, do you? It's like it's sort of returning the question to him. You said so. It just came out of your mouth. I'm Christ the King. Look at me. Do I look like Christ the King to you? But you said so. So I guess it must be true, right? And I think that he may have taken that as Jesus knows Pilate doesn't believe. Like, this man knows, or in a sense, the way the reply is coming back is like, you know and I know that you don't believe I'm the Christ, but you have said so. You've said, it is being said that people are saying it, because he hasn't said he is the Christ, has he? But he's saying this is the accusation, and he says, you said it. You said the thing I'm accused of. And it's been said by many and believed by none of you. I mean, could that be the sort of unspoken thing that passes between them? And is that speculation on some level, of course. But I do think that somewhere there's a way to understand, that the Lord can reveal to us even things that are difficult to understand, because I think that is difficult to understand. To understand, to have a fully, what I mean is to understand and saying, this is what it means. I have a lock on what this means. Because some passages, you read them and you have the meaning, and it's like, that's what it means. There's no further need for interpretation. This is well defined. Easy to understand. This is not well defined. And it's not terribly important, but it always seems important to me to understand everything. I like to understand what he's saying and why they react this way. But the reaction he gets out of Pilate, because he may take it as not a denial, but a plea of no contest. It's like, everyone's saying I'm the Christ. You say I'm the Christ. They say I'm the Christ. I haven't said anything. But he doesn't. But again, at the same time, the Lord is not trying to defend himself. He's not trying to put up a good defense. He could accuse them back. He could do he could do a miracle for Pilate. There's all kinds of ways he could extract himself from the situation. But he just lets things ride. Just lets it ride. And they were the more fierce, verse 5, saying, he stirreth up the people. I forgot about that one. What is it? He perverts the people. He is perverting the nation. And of course, I should have mentioned that, and it's important to mention it in passing because, I don't know linguistically where we understand. Pervert. We think of perversion as being almost exclusively a sexual thing. It's just like with seduction, the word seduce. I've talked about this, how in modern English, I say seduce, you think sexual, because that is how we've come to understand the idea of seduction. Seduction is sexual seduction, even though the word itself is not strictly confined to sexual seduction. It's more broad than that. It just simply is. Same thing with perversion. If we say perversion, we think of sexual perversion most frequently, because we have a society that is awash in sexual perversion, and it is the tip of everyone's tongue. It is the thing that comes to mind. He's a pervert. Oh, whoa. Especially if you say someone's a pervert. He's a perverter of the nation. What is he? Larry Flint? There was the famous defendant in the case, The People versus Larry Flint. Never saw the movie, but I saw the trailers, and I know the idea is he is he basically brought pornography to America. But he brought pornography to America. He opened the door wide. And so brought it into the mainstream, Anyways, that's, you think of that as someone who's perverting the nation, putting his filthy magazines in every corner store and in front of 5-year-olds. Though that's not meant for 5-year-olds. Well, it was meant for me when I was 5-year-old, because that's what they were putting in front of my face. Thanks, dude. Thanks, Supreme Court. Good job. You enabled the reach of perverts right down into the realm of kindergarten. Because they're, I never saw classical hardcore pornography until I was like 16. Maybe 17. It was pretty 16 probably, I think. But like Hustler, that's Larry Flint's nice magazine. And I say that completely ironically. That's the first thing I ever saw at 5 years old. Because the hardcore pornography was always more rare. You had to go to special, dingy, little, creepy shops to get it, right? Because it was hardcore pornography. And the convenience store operator didn't want to sell hardcore pornography. They didn't want to do that. So he had a toned down version of it, basically. And that's what I was exposed to when I was young. It's not the same, but it's close enough. And compared to more tame offerings, or compared to just like leave your smut put it in some hole. But even that, they create anything that's created in this world is going to end up in the hands of children. The people make things. I've often said they do things. It's funny I'm talking about this because the point I was trying to make, and I'm going to go back to it right now because it's just really useless. Though there's plenty to be said on that subject. Perversion means to twist something out of the norm. Like to make it crooked. In fact, we have the idea of a kink, like someone must have a kink in their character, and of course, again, that's another one we have put off towards a sexual implication, like kinky. We think of that. That adjective is almost exclusively used in that context, though, like at least in modern times. But we still have the saying of someone has a little kink in their character. It means there's some sort of something a bit not right, a little bit bent. And same thing with not perfectly straight. And same thing with perverting the nation. The idea is, there is a right way that they should be going. They should be kind of everyone marching in lockstep at the vision of like a line, and a perverter of the nation is one who is causing people to go astray, causing them to not follow the prescribed way. There's a way that is prescribed, but there's a difference between proscribed. It means forbidden. Prescribed means this is what you should do. The prescribed way of people behaving is like the way, you should obey the Romans, you should pay your taxes. And the idea is like he would pervert them. It already said how he perverted them. He perverts them by the nation, by saying we shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar, and by claiming himself as Christ the King. And the idea is that this could lead to a revolution. That's what he's saying. he's going to take the people off the straight and narrow, so to speak, from the Roman perspective, and lead them astray, pervert them, pervert their minds to thinking like, hey, we should fight against the Romans. So the accusation is that this man is in danger of fomenting revolution. And so now they become more fierce, saying he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Jewry. He's going around teaching all the Jews, all throughout all the region. This is cropped up and you've barely even heard about it. But here we are telling you about it. He's gone from Galilee to this place, and he is stirring the people up. And on some level, we know, they say, Hosanna, they were crying and laying palms down. But it's not exactly like laying palms down is not taking up swords. But the accusation is they're trying to get him to think, hey, he's going to start a revolution. But of course, his revolution is pointing at them. It's a reform of the religion. He's saying, you are hypocrites. I've come to seek and save that which is lost. He's preaching the gospel to sinners. And mostly undermining them. Mostly they're afraid for their own, the sense of like that they are losing control. Because his revolution is entirely religious in character in his time. He's not attempting to put up, to subvert any. Jesus doesn't conquer by subversion. He's not going to, that's what they think. Like he's going to sort of go around and win the hearts and minds of the people and get them all ready to fight for him and lead them off into a disastrous fight against the Romans, which will fail. And then the Romans will come and destroy the city, take away our temple and our place. And we'll have let it happen. We'll have let it happen because we saw it coming. We saw what he could do. We saw the danger, and we didn't do anything about it. So they were very fierce in their accusations. They became vehement in the way they're accusing him. No, he stirs up the people. There's got to be, to Pilate, the guy seems pretty harmless. He doesn't look like a man of war. That's for sure. He's not going to have a man of war. He looks like a workman. We always assumed Jesus was a carpenter because he was a carpenter's son, right? Certainly would have had some experience with that. He did something on the way to being 30. Sorry about the yawning. I don't know why I'm yawning today. Probably because I had trouble sleeping last night. So, he's going to look more like a workman, less like a warrior. And when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. Oh, is he a Galilean? He started in Galilee, you say. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was at Jerusalem at that time for the Passover. And of course, he'd come there from time to time. So, Pilate immediately sees an opening. Oh, he's a Galilean. I'll send him to Herod. Because, and here's another thing. All right? Here's another thing I just thought of. I had said that maybe Pilate had hardly heard of Jesus. That probably isn't true, obviously. The Romans would have had eyes and ears, and Pilate would have had his spies on all the doings of the Jews. It would be watching, and he'd have informants and stuff. So he'd know all about it, probably. He'd probably discount the claims of miracles, per se, as being, because the spies would probably be Jews who were paid to, bring information. And those, if they're paid to bring information and they're, betraying Jesus in their own small way all the time, they may themselves be skeptical or maybe even favoring the Pharisees' position, but probably be bringing Pilate an honest assessment. Because the spy and say, well, Paul, you're making this up. I'm not making it up. It's very likely. Um, it's just I'm thinking, why does Pilate react so? Yeah, I mean, it's like he knows. You know what I mean? Like he knows. I find no fault in this man. He just talked to him for 5 minutes. He probably knows the accusations are false. Because anyone going around with multitudes and stuff, like Pilate he ain't got his finger on that. But someone going around preaching and stuff, and so he has his spies. Like, well, what does he say? What's he preaching? Like, oh, stuff about heaven, about Then he tells these stories, and tell me the stories, and then Pilate's like, I don't even know what that means. It's like, it doesn't sound like revolution to me. Like, no, he never says anything against the government. In fact, there was this incident where they asked him about the coin, and he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar." God, I think Pilate knows full well he's no kind of threat. He probably knows full well, and here they come with him because he knows about him. He knows who this is. He knows. He probably understands the thing about why the spies wouldn't give the false accusations, because they're not the ones being offended by Jesus' words. I mean, the Pharisees perceived that he spake this parable against them. These aren't Pharisee spies, because the Pharisees are not going to be any kind of friend. They have their own opinion about the Roman rule, and they don't want it. They feel, they don't really feel like they should pay taxes to Caesar, but they'll never say so, lest they be accused of something, such as trying to start a revolution. So they don't teach that. They avoid the question too, but they never avoided the way Jesus did, because they were astonished at his answer. So I think Pilate must have had already quite extensive understanding of, at least of the fact that Jesus didn't represent any kind of threat. At least he'd never said anything threatening so far. As far as he could tell, everything he'd been doing was within the realm of what was allowed under the Roman government. He wasn't breaking any laws. It's not against the Roman government to go preach in your Judaism. They never accused him of any sort of religious thing except for being the Christ. And Pilate would have known that he was reputed to be the Christ, and probably also that his spies had never heard him say he was the Christ. And I'll say, Paul, aren't you making up Pilate's spies? I don't know how he wouldn't have had spies, like watching things. I mean, not that they're going to know everything, but like some word is going to come to him of this Jesus, just like Herod. Herod heard of Jesus. We know Herod heard of Jesus. He heard of Jesus. John heard of Jesus. And the Roman government ain't going to hear of Jesus? It just doesn't make sense. He doesn't acknowledge, I've heard of you. Well, So we had heard earlier, it said Herod heard of Jesus and he thought that it was John the Baptist come back from the dead. At least recognizing on some level the similarity between Jesus and John. John the Baptist had preached also, and it would have been a known figure at that time. Pilate, as the governor, I'm sure he's not particularly interested in the affairs of the Jews, but it's his job to keep tabs on things and make sure things don't get out of control. So he would have had since Jesus was doing things publicly. It's one thing, Pilate might not know about a secret plot to assassinate him by a small cabal. His spies may not be able to penetrate that sort of thing. But as far as just general informants, and you understand, informing for the government is a long-held tradition, and it's a way for a lot of people who otherwise, maybe poor and destitute, could earn money. They just by reporting to the centurion, they didn't necessarily go right to Pilate, but they report to the centurions, or the other, and they would know a bit about Jesus. This man, yes, we hear of him. He's been preaching from Galilee and such, and We had informants listening, and there's no fomentous or revolutionary talk. It's all religious stuff of the Jews and about their God, and and stories that seem like they have some sort of. They certainly don't sound like revolutionary stories. He would have known. But he's in a situation now where he knows about Jesus. And he knows the Pharisees are angry. He probably knows a bit about why. Like they hate him because he's criticizing them. He's criticizing them. Right? And he doesn't like them. But on some level they have a relationship. They are like I said, the Roman governor would have had local rulers under him. The elders of the Jews are authorities among the Jews. They have authority among the Jews and the Romans are somewhat, they back them up. And for certain things, they have to go to the Romans to put men to death and stuff. And Herod also has a jurisdiction, and I suppose he can put men to death. He had John the Baptist beheaded, right? So, verse 8, and when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season, because he heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. So again, Pilate probably is purely skeptical and thinks this miracle stuff is nonsense. And, not that, he has a more businessman-like, straight, he always struck me as a bit of a stoic. I could be wrong, but it's just, his conversations with Jesus and them are very abrupt, it doesn't seem like he really wants to be involved in this particular thing, because it's a religious question. He's probably not a very religious person. And non-religious people, the last thing they want is to get involved in some sort of religious dispute. So he is all too glad. And that's probably how he sees this, as some sort of religious dispute. The reason he's going to eventually condemn Jesus is because he knows that on some level, the Jews have, the elders of the Jews and the chief priests have some, like if they complain about him to his authorities, that can have some weight. And on some level, he has to work with them. So as much as he might dislike them and not want to play their game and just give them what they want, in the end, as Jesus said, because of importunity, he will give them everything they want. The importunity was the parable where the guy says, which it wasn't exactly a parable, it was just an example. If a traveler comes by night to a man's house and he goes to his neighbor, his friend, and he pounds on his door at night and says, "Open unto me, someone has come, and I need bread." He said the guy won't get up because he's his friend. That's not why he's getting up. Like, oh, my friend's at the door. But he will get up because it's the only way to stop him from pounding on the door, because of importunity, because he's making a nuisance of himself. If you make enough of a nuisance of yourself, you'll do it. So the fact that they keep pounding and like, this Jesus is a criminal, you got to do something about this. He doesn't need to agree with them. He's like the unjust judge. The widow has come before him, avenge me of mine adversary. And though he fears neither God nor man, he will do whatever they ask, not because he's their friend, not because he believes Jesus is guilty, but because of importunity. It's just, you, sir, are too much trouble. I don't know, maybe I need to reboot my computer. I'm not going to do it now, but I'm going to reset the camera again real quick. It's not hard to do. Wait. Oh, that looks better again. So, okay, back to the verses. Yeah, because of importunity. So Pilate really wanted, Herod I think in one of the other Gospels we get a lot more. Let me see. Let's see. He had heard many things of him, and there goes the camera. And he hoped to have seen some miracle. He was like, I would like to see a trick. He has a more decadent sort of attitude. I think Pilate is a stoic, but Herod's kind of curious, like, oh, a trick, a miracle. I would like to see a miracle. I've never seen one. That'd be exciting. Bring this Jesus before me. Yes, indeed. He was really happy. He's like, I wanted to see. And he's not going to go down and see him in the street somewhere, but that he should come before him, that's right. This man's reputed to work miracles. He'd heard all about it. He had his spies. Why Pilate wouldn't, Pilate remains zipped. And it doesn't say he knew much, but he must have known at least as much as Herod. I mean, come on. Pilate doesn't even know as much as Herod? It just doesn't make sense. It would be incompetent of him as a governor not to keep his finger on things and know what was going on. People often will say that, the Romans didn't record anything about Jesus. From their perspective, it's like an unfortunate incident. Like, it's not the kind of thing they necessarily want to put down in books because it was a kind of a disaster. You know what I mean? The religion that sprouted from this became like this, like, virulent plague, like a pandemic that infected the entire empire eventually. And early on, it's the kind of thing they wanted to stamp out, not like provide evidence for and confirmation to. So there's a lot of motivation to keep it under wraps. So I'm not surprised Pilate didn't leave like written records of, oh, well, this man Jesus came and he had been reputed to do these miracles and I believed it not myself, but they brought him before me and blah, blah, blah. People want to see that kind of historic record. But it's like Pilate's self-interest conflicts with that. Jesus who? That's a lot more effective. What are you talking about? And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. They were vehemently. That means, with heat often. I'm not going to look it up. But often it means just very earnestly accused him with a lot of emotion and vigor, right? Like if you're going to vehemently deny, it's like, he didn't, like getting emotional or at least getting demonstrative and making a lot of noise and stuff. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught and mocked him and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him again to Pilate. They sent him at naught, it means they, oops, there goes my headphones. All right, so, they made light of him. We have the term make light. To set it naught is the extreme version of that. It is the most, like I've talked about how when Jesus said about, thou shalt not kill, that various forms of verbal degradation, were also on the table. And one of the things about honor your father and your mother, it says, do not set a light by your father and your mother. Which means to make light of them, as we say, which is an idiom. It's like, what does it mean to make light of them? It means to make them seem like not a very important thing. And they set him at naught like he was nothing. He's nothing. They mocked him. Put him in a gorgeous robe. And I believe that's when he did not do the crown of thorns. He just put on like a gorgeous robe upon him. Because again, Jesus did not have, he would have had his road clothes, whatever quality they were. I mean, I don't think he was in rags, but from Herod's perspective, he was not very regal. You know what I mean? So they clothed him in a gorgeous robe. I do want to know. I'm sorry, I get too curious about the words, and I don't think it's necessary for understanding, but I often am just like, I just want to know what those words mean, and I want to look up vehement. Here we are on Bible Hub. And, by the way, if you see me use this, oh, you can't see up here, but right up here, it won't go any farther. Can I bring it down? No, nope, that's it. But it says, like, if you have this open, above this word here, it says Luke, and that's where you choose your book, and here's where you choose your chapter. And here it says version. There's a drop-down menu which you can see. And I use the Strong's with the King James Version. It's a King James Version with the Strong's numbers embedded. As you can see, there are several other versions which you can do with that. And by having that embedded, it's basically like having the computer has linked, instead of looking up words in the Strong's Concordance the way I used to have to do, or to have an interlinear Bible open. Like when I used to study, I used to have my standard Bible. I used to have it required at least 3 books to study the Bible. I'd have like my Bible, which is regular standard study Bible. And then I'd have my interlinear open, which was like the Greek New Testament or Old Testament, as the case were, with an English translation above each word and a Strong's number attached to each word. That's the Green's Interlinear. One thing I disliked about Green's Interlinear is it was riddled with mistakes in the numbering. I mean, very often they'd have transposed numbers where it was like, 6852 instead of 6825, and you'd have to track these errors down, and it would slow you down. And there may be errors here. The thing is, on Bible Hub, I've suspected errors at times because of unusual words being translated a certain way. But I don't think I've ever actually encountered one, so kudos to them for making a nice free product for all of us to use. And not only that, my Green's Interlinear I bought for $100 in the 90s. And then the third book, of course, is the Strong's Concordance with the definitions at the back. So the Greens, the Bible, any of the Strongs. And now I don't need any books. I could literally I could use my study Bible, but I have my computer to do the work of the other ones. Actually, I used to always read all my old Bible studies recorded on my website were with my Bible. But these are all done like literally with just the text and occasional referencing to this. And it's kind of fun to just ditch all my notes, because oftentimes my old notes were things that distracted me and made me think along a certain line. And though my old Bible is kind of precious to me, it is sort of also can be a crutch, which is at the same time helps you to walk, but also makes you only walk a certain way. So see him. Okay, I missed that verse 9 for some reason. He questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. That probably really ticked him off. He asked him a lot of questions. That's why he sets him in knot. He gets angry because he'd been excited to see him, and then he comes and he won't even talk. How disappointing. So now he gets the back end of that. How quickly that kind of excitement can turn on you. My gorgeous robe. What was that the word I was looking up? Lampros, bright. We get our word lamp from that. And when I hover, I get a little quick definition, but I'm not going to bring up the full definition by opening a new tab for you, because I'm just going to tell you, this is lampros, from which we get the word lamp. Did you realize lamp was a Greek word? I don't think I even remember that. And set him again to Pilate, set him at naught, mocked him. They vehemently accused him. Eutonos. In a well-sounding manner. Interesting. Well-strung? It means well-strung. Huh. Eutonos. Notice there was tone in there, which we also apparently get from Greek, tone. Because I believe it's not just me. Like, that's a musical term. I just want to check that out real quick. Eutonos, in a well-strung manner. Tieno, meaning to stretch. Maybe it has nothing to do with tone. I'd be curious to find that out, but I'm not going to drag you guys through that. That's the kind of thing, like, if I was studying on my own, I'd track that down just because the English words. I like to understand the English language. It's always been one of my best subjects. English. I was a bit of a natural at it. God, I say that and I can just imagine all the people saying, all the mistakes I make. Because it's, you talk for an hour every day and don't make mistakes. And I will be impressed. Anyways, so vehemently is well strung. It means, it says figuratively, vigorously. You know what I mean? And which we already said. But I guess I assume the sense of vehemence as being like they got angry. But really, what it is that, well, maybe there's emotion involved. It's hard to tell exactly what. But they certainly put together, they really tried to accuse him in a vigorous way. They tried to, just like with Pilate, they tried to say the things that were most likely to enrage the authority. They probably tried to tell Herod as many things as would tick him off as they could think of. He's the king. He thinks he's the king. And so in response, Herod puts him on this lampros robe, this brightly colored robe, and sent him again to Pilate. Because before, like I said, he probably had a dingy gray or, it's kind of sepia-toned road garment, yellowed from the from sun and stuff. It'd be somewhat yellowed and, not the idea of Jesus wearing this white robe with a bright blue sash only after he saw Herod. You know what I mean? The picture we have of Jesus in that white robe with the blue sash on it is not from the Bible. That's just maybe like now Jesus is wearing that. He's got bruises on his face from being beaten. And he's got this robe from from Herod, make himself look more regal. But obviously, Herod does this ironically. It probably doesn't make him look any more regal. Makes him probably look silly. He sends him back to Pilate. And the same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together. For before they were at enmity between themselves. So this is a big boon for Pilate. Before they hated each other. But because of this brought them together. Because they both sort of endured, Herod is not considered the legitimate king by a lot of the Jews. And the elders and the chief priests probably don't respect him. They respect his authority, but he knows it's a grudging respect. And Pilate is in a similar boat. They don't like him and they don't want him to be there, but he's there. And so and I don't think it's because of Jesus so much as they have both shared this experience with the Pharisees and saw them kind of angered. And by Pilate sending Jesus to Herod, who had wanted to see him, and as much as he annoyed him, he was pleased with Pilate for giving him something he wanted to see Jesus. And as disappointing as Jesus was, he felt now a renewed sense of camaraderie by him and Pilate kind of having tried the same case. He saw Jesus and the Pharisees and the elders and their vehement accusations, and it was quite an interesting thing in the spectacle. And in spite of his disappointment in Jesus, just seeing all that was probably made his day from his perspective. That was interesting. And Pilate receiving this Jesus in the king's robe, it's like Herod sent him the king back. And as a joke, he's like, what are we doing with this guy? He doesn't have him executed. He erased him. What he's saying, he's no threat at all. Herod knows all about him. He's heard about him. He'd like to see a miracle. And as much as he pissed him off, he didn't say, like, this man should die. He put him in a king's robe and sends him back to Pilate. Pilate is sort of in on the gag. He also knows that Jesus is no threat. And he's probably enjoying himself in this. Seeing the Pharisees and the elders lose their minds over this guy. And and Herod sending him back in the brightly colored robe. Funny. Not with a sentence of death. Like, you send me the king and I return him to you. Is he not even more regal than before? So, but now we're going to get down to the serious business of Pilate's going to call them together. Okay, well, anyways, we've run out of time. I would have liked to have covered that all today, but I don't know. It's just the pace we go at, right? And one person told me they like the pace, and no one has ever complained that I go too slow. So hopefully it's entertaining enough, or informative enough, educational enough, that it's worth sitting through. For those who want to know. All right, so we will pick it up in verse 13 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me in this study. I almost feel like I'd like to just keep going because it's like we're in the midst of it. The trial of Jesus. It's not really much of a trial, is it? Nobody believes he's guilty. Everybody knows he's innocent. But we also see the leaders of the Jews losing their minds. And the funny thing is, Pilate probably in his mind is more afraid of them than of Jesus. And as far as fomenting a revolution, as far as starting something, you gotta think about it. He's got Jesus in this robe, this silly robe, and he's already been beaten. Pilate hasn't had him beaten yet, but he hasn't done that. But the Herod's people have kind of mocked him and stuff, but the chief priests have hit him, roughed him up a bit. He's got this guy. He's no threat. But these people, he stirs up the nation, and they've got like these the gathering multitudes of people to shout for Jesus' blood. And in some level, Pilate's going to know, if I don't give them blood, the people are going to go nuts. And I might have a problem here. Anyways, thanks for joining me in this study. We'll be back again tomorrow to continue in the Gospel of Luke.
Associate yourselves, O ye people, and he shall be broken in pieces, and give ear, all ye of far countries. Gird yourselves, and he shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and he shall be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God